welcome to episode 3 of our board building project. We last left off, we left the grain board clamped up and on the rocker table, and the next step on that board is to start doing the rails. But before we do that, we're going to start working on the other half of this project, which is restoring our 9/6 Stewart nose rider. And the first thing we're going to do in this process is just go through the board with our orbital sander, and we're just going to kind of take down any excess material, like on these repairs, these sloppy repairs I did years ago. And we're going to kind of work through the gloss coat on this, probably take off most of the gloss coat, because we're going to end up re-glassing this board anyway. Just little things like this, these like kind of sloppy patches. And we're just going to give the board a good sanding. I want to make sure that I don't go, you can kind of see here some of the fiberglass weave starting to come up. I don't want to take off so much resin that I start getting into the weave, but just enough that I'm kind of getting to the weave, if that makes sense. So just stuff like this is really flattening it out and exposing where my damage is, and that's going to give us a great starting point to start doing our individual repair jobs for different cracks. So time to power this bad boy up, go to town. We've gotten to the point where we've reached the bubble, the infamous bubble back here on the back of the board. This is the delamination bubble, and to get this off, I've been thinking about it a little bit. I've never done this before, so I don't really know the best way. I'm going to use a razor blade, and I'm going to try to cut very carefully around the perimeter of the glass and carefully peel it off. The fiberglass is too thick for me to get in there with just a razor blade, so I'm switching over to the Leatherman knife. That's giving me a little bit more oomph, and hopefully that'll work. So this is really interesting. I've only cut a little square out just to start because I wanted to see how the Leatherman worked, but you can see just from this square, you can look at, here's our foam, and we've got almost a ½ an inch gap between the foam and this outer layer of glass. Now I don't really like, it's kind of annoying to just cut with the knife. It's not super efficient, and it's making a little bit of a mess, and you don't want fiberglass everywhere. So what I think I'm gonna do is lift up. You know, it ain't pretty, right? But it should, see how it's starting to go? It should start to go, look at that. Boom, easy, quick, right? I can pull a lot of glass off. I just gotta be careful as I get towards the boundary where the glass is still adhered to the foam. I need to be much more careful so I'm not ripping off good glass. But just going to keep working on this. Make sure you vacuum up your particles because fiberglass is hazardous, and making progress. Okay, a few minutes later, this is our delamination patch. So what I'm going to do, and this may not be the correct way, but this is the way I would do it, is the first thing I want to do is try to get everything to be relatively level, right? So we have a pretty big crater here. We have some foam that is broken down. We have some compression. We've removed a fair amount of fiberglass. So we have like a fairly big kind of hole in the board. And so what I want to do first is get some resin and fill it with some filler to make it kind of like pasty and thick. And I want to use that to fill in the hole to make it so everything's sort of on the same plane. And the idea with that is after we're going to sand it flush so this is relatively flat, and then we're going to put a big fiberglass patch on it and then make that flush. And it's important for when you put fiberglass down on something, you want to make sure you're putting it down on something flat. You don't want it to have like a bunch of ridges and stuff, because that's going to create areas of weakness. So step one for us is to level this out. All right, we've got our Total Boat epoxy here, and I've just mixed in, this is about 5 pumps of epoxy, and I've mixed in some of the high density filler, and I'll put a link to that in the video of what that is. It's just basically like white powder, and I want to get it to like consistency that it's just sort of flowing, but just barely. I want it to be as thick as possible, but I still want it to flow, and the reason for that is it's going to be a lot easier if I can just pour this in. And I've already mixed this for quite a while, so we're good on time. And what I'm going to do with my ultra fancy squeegee here is just pull it back and forth. And it's better to do this in steps. Like if you don't know if you have enough, it's better to just go slow. You can always add more. it's a lot more difficult to take it away. And remember, pretty much everything you add here, if you add too much, you're going to be sanding it away. So you want to be as precise as you can. I don't think I've added quite enough, but that's okay. Well, this is looking pretty good. And remember, this is going to look hideous, but we're going to paint it, so you're not going to see it. And make sure you get resin all up into this edge. This is really important. The edges are super important. Okay, so I'm out of resin, and I've also put some blocks here to make the board level, because you don't want it to be crooked, or all the resin will slide to one side and it'll look terrible. But what I want to do is look down on this side here, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm filling this up. So I still probably got about halfway there. I need to go mix up another batch, and I'm just going to kind of build this up. While that first bit of resin on the Stewart fiberglass board cures, we'll get back to the grain board. Last night I laid up the first set of tail and nose blocks, and those look like this. These are just thicker panels of wood that fit into the nose, and we're going to build these up layer by layer, and this is going to be the material that we're working with to make the nose. Same thing here at the tail. Okay, they provide us these jigs, which are pretty cool, and you can use just the scrap material from the bottom panel and the top panel to cut these out of existing wood, so there's no waste. And now what we're going to do is start diving into the railing. And the way the rail is sort of, you're going to have to sort of see it over the course of this episode to understand it, because it's a bit tricky to explain. But basically what we'll be doing is using small pieces of wood, kind of like this, and we're going to build the rail up one layer at a time. So the first layer is going to go in this notch, right? And we're going to build up layer by layer all the way up here. But this first one is particularly important because it's really going to provide a lot of stiffness to the board. And you can see the board's still rather flexible. The whole thing still has a bit of flex to it, and we don't want to lose the rocker that we've worked so hard to put into this during this stage. So we want to make sure while we're working that the board is clamped down securely to the rocker table, so the shape and rocker is preserved. So I'm going to do that right now, put a couple clamps back on, and then we're going to go in, and the first sort of step, it's sort of boring, but is to check and make sure that this notch is big enough to receive this first piece of wood. So most of them are, like, see, this one fits in nice and snug, but say this one is a little tight. This is a bit of an awkward thing to sand, but I find that the file on my Leatherman seems to fit quite well. This little piece of wood fits in, and that's all it took. Super easy. Okay, we are ready to start laying in our first piece of the rail. So this first piece, the one that fits in the notches, they call this the chine log. And the chine log is, we're just going to glue it in with wood glue. We're going to use our Type-On 3. And actually that's a good segue into something. I made a mistake. I didn't realize this in our last video. I was saying that the epoxy and the Type-On and stuff were add-ons that were not included in the kit. And apparently that's not true. If you get the complete kit for these boards, you do get adhesives and glue, epoxy, all that good stuff. There was just a little bit of confusion, and they thought I already had material, so they didn't send it to me. But normally when you get the kit, you get all this stuff. So we're going to continue using the stuff Jamestown Distributor sent us, which we're very thankful for. But just something to take note of, that when you get the kit, you get all the goodies. When we start doing the chine log gluing, what you'll notice is that there's a fair amount of curvature and bending you're going to have to put into the wood. And to deal with that, we're going to do something that I've never done before, which is steam wood. And in the manual, they recommend using an iron and a hot iron in like a wet blanket or a wet towel, and you just put the iron on the towel and it steams it up. But I went and found our iron and found out that it actually has a steam function, which is pretty exciting. So I'm going to try to just go to town and see if I can steam these parts up just directly with the iron. I don't know if it's going to work. That's cool, but I'm not sure it's really working as effectively as it should. I'm going to go with the wet towel technique. I think that's going to be better. Oh yeah. Now we're cooking with gas. So the manual recommends doing is you kind of just hold the iron on the towel until you see some steam kind of rising. We can also shoot steam in. Wow, that really worked, like, quickly. It's amazing. Look at that. Okay, so we've got our first bit here. I'm gonna get a clamp to hold it in place, and then we're gonna we'll start gluing. It's a little bit tricky getting the glue on, but what I'm doing is I have the chine log just kind of floating. Got to make sure it's supported a little bit, otherwise it'll break because it's pretty sensitive. And I'm just gonna drop a little bit of glue in kind of where I think it's supposed to go, and then I'll just kind of lift it up and lift it over that bit of glue I just created. Make sure I get it all saturated. And this, you know, I'm doing it kind of messily, but I can always come in after with paper towel and clean it up before it dries, which is always a good idea because you don't want to leave a mess. The chine log is in. It was a bit touch and go and fairly messy, but I got it in reasonably well. It gets tricky up by the nose here where you have quite a bit of curvature in the wood, and you really got to steam it a lot and get creative with how you're kind of shimming and using clamps. Having a lot of clamps really is helpful. I'm just going to run over to board number 2, show you our progress on that. We let our resin dry overnight and then came in and started sanding it, and it's hard as a rock. We want to do the same thing that we did here, but we want to do it for all the smaller issues. So I went through the board. Let's go flip it here. And I did this, I didn't film it because it was kind of boring, but I've just gone through and found all these little parts that had a little bit of fiberglass that was just soft with foam crushing underneath, and just cut them out, right? So I'm just cutting out the cancer and making sure everywhere around here is still stiff. As we move forward, you'll see they get bigger. Some on the rail and then up to the front. This is where we have most of our problems. And what we're gonna do, quite a big one up here on the rail and then some up on the nose. So what we're gonna do all in one swoop is mix up a decent batch of epoxy, and we're just gonna come in and shoop. So on this batch, we made it a little bit thicker than the last one. So it's not quite running. It's kind of like, I don't know, a little thicker than chunky peanut butter. See, it doesn't even run off our little knife there. It just kind of holds in place. And I did that because we got some curvature here, and I want this stuff to just kind of stay where I put it. I don't want it to run anywhere. That will make my life easier. And having a squeegee would make this easier, but I don't have one. And I'm just gonna shoot that in there. Boom. And I realize this is not elegant repair work, and people that are like board shapers that do this for a living are going to cringe at the quality of my work, but this is meant to be for everyday folks like you and me. There she is, all patched up with some resin curing. Really ugly, but sealed up, which is all that matters. The way that the railing actually works is pretty cool. It's sort of like a progressive building blocks using these cool pieces of wood. So the first piece of wood is sort of shaped, let's see if you can see this. It's sort of shaped with a flat side and then like an oval side. And this is going to be the first one. I think they call this a starter strip. And this is going to go right here outside of the piece of wood we already installed. And then we're going to start building onto that. So the oval is going to be on the top, and then we're going to use pieces of wood. And I have no idea how they make these. These ones are shaped with little ovals, right? So this actually fits very neatly. Let's see if I can do it with one hand. This fits very neatly onto the bottom one. So just like this. Sort of like that, right? They'll just help, those are two just join right together, and we'll hold them together with wood glue. And then what we're gonna do is just build layers on top and on top and on top, and it's gonna follow the curvature of our frames. So it's a pretty cool way to do it. I'm curious how these pieces of wood are made, because this seems pretty complicated to add that curvature in. I'm sure there's a nifty tool to do it. And so we're gonna do that. We're gonna do one layer at a time, nice and slow, wood glue, clamping all the way. Okay, we're gonna start laying up our first rail strip. And I figured, let's just video it first time around. I haven't done any of them yet. You're gonna get the real, authentic experience here. Steaming the beginning of it because we start off with the tail, which is quite a bit of bend to it, and going to clamp that there to start, and gonna work this steam a little bit more. And you want to steam this enough so that it bends, but they warn against kinking. And kinking, I think, is when, I mean, it sounds just like what it probably is. Instead of having a nice curve, you have like an abrupt kink. I think I might have got a little bit of a kink up in the nose, so I'm trying to be more careful this time. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of bend that. That looks pretty good. Making sure I get it in on the inside seam of this other piece of wood that we've already put in there, because we want it to bond to the vertical surface and the floor. So let's see, make sure we're getting good contact. It looks like we are. This guy. It's a little awkward, but there it is. Jam that in there. Boom. This is why you can't go wrong with having too many clamps. So again, I want the wood to bond to this vertical surface and the bottom surface. So I'm focusing my gluing into the angle, knowing that I can get it to kind of shoot out everywhere. There we go. That's nice. Gotta make sure it's pressing in tight. There we go. That looks good. Could also go like this. Probably a smart idea. Yeah, there it is. Boom! Why did I realize that? Alright. So I'm gonna probably alternate between some of those, some of these, push it in, push it down. I want to definitely clean up any drips. I don't want drips everywhere. That'll just be a headache to deal with. So I'm gonna do this kind of go like this and go like this. That seems like a good strategy. The sign of a good craftsman is not having a mess. So you can tell how good of a craftsman I am. I have messes everywhere. But that's okay. We're gonna get to where we need to go. So before I proceed forward, I'm gonna go get some paper towels and just clean this up, because I don't want to get halfway through and then come back and have it all gross. Got the barbecue going here, cooking some pieces of wood. What we're gonna have to do is bend this whole rail quite a bit. So what I'm gonna do to start is get it to about here with clamps and glue before I start steaming. There we go. Get our iron. Start cooking. All right, now it's a few minutes later. This feels like one of those cooking shows where you put the food in and then magically pull it out and it's cooked. TV magic. And we're just gonna start the bend. We're not gonna go like too crazy to start. We're gonna do this in steps. Engage that first edge. Clamp it. There it is. Okay, cool. Keep bending. That looks good. Now this is the end is the hardest part. This last bit is the hardest part to bend over. So you just again have to really take your time. Steam, steam, steam. So now I'm just going to be doing this last little bit. See how we did? Got my wedge. The wedge is going to make it easier for me to bend that last bit in. We're going to go back to the Stewart board where we have Fiona helping out with our glass repair job. We're doing it sort of in two parts. So Fiona is wetting the glass out that's going to go on this big patch. We're going to do the big one first as sort of a practice run. And we still had some bumps in here that might prove to be problematic. So we're going to do this all in once, which is a little challenging, but I've got a little bit of resin here with filler. I'm going to take my squeegee and I'm just going to kind of come through and fill any of these remaining holes. I need both hands to do that, so I'm going to turn the camera off in a second. But once that's done, we're going to carefully put the fiberglass over this. So we're doing, again, 2-in-1, kind of filling the holes and putting the glass patch. And then we're going to use some painter's plastic to clean it up, and I'll show that in a second. The repair is complete. We've got the painter's plastic over the top, squeegeed all the bubbles out, pressing the plastic really tight into the fiberglass. We have 2 layers of fiberglass over here. And what's really nice about this technique is when we're done, when this is cured, we'll just peel the plastic off, and we're going to have a very, very smooth finish right off the bat. And we'll probably only have to do one more round of fairing just to make sure the edge of where the fiberglass starts to lift off from the other part of the board, kind of around the perimeter. We'll do a little bit of fairing in there and probably one more round of painter's plastic. But then we're pretty much going to be ready for paint. So it's a really fast way. Instead of just, if you lay the glass without the plastic, you're going to be left with a very textured finish, and that's going to be difficult to paint over. You're going to usually have to put some fairing compound in that. So this just kind of accelerates the whole procedure, and I find that you can get a really, really good result. So it's a really cool approach. Rail strip number 3. Starting to get dark in here though.
Shiny, so it's so hard to see through unless you get the right angle. You're good.
How's it going out here?
Working by candlelight.
It was raining earlier, so we couldn't work out here, and so now, and it's cooler at night anyway. Fiona is patching up all of the many little dings on the bottom of the Stewart, and then it should be cured and ready to sand tomorrow. Rail strip number 4 is on, and with that, we're going to call it quits for this episode of the build. Thanks for tuning in. Got a lot of details in on this one. This is probably the most difficult part, I'm hoping. After this, we're going to do some deck planking and prepping the interior of the board to join the deck on. So it moves pretty fast, the build. But anyway, thanks for watching, and see you soon.